master of disguise. Zartan, changes color right before your eyes. Zartan.
Hey, welcome to Half the Battle, and welcome back to main character May.
And naturally, we're continuing our look at Zartan.
And today, we're gonna take a look at the character, starting with the file cards. And yeah, there's gonna be quite a bit to unpack here.
Okay, let's just get into the controversy straight away and get it over with. Yes, there are two different versions of Zartan V1's file card. The difference is that the first version has 2 paragraphs, while the second version has the second paragraph removed.
I'm just gonna warn you all in advance, this is gonna be one hell of a digression, and it's gonna be long.
And why is that? Well, let me just read the second paragraph in full. Psychological profile. Extreme paranoid schizophrenic. Grows into various multiple personalities to such an extent that the original personality becomes buried and forgotten.
Everything in that paragraph is wrong and harmful.
Okay, I'm not an expert on mental health in general, or schizophrenia, known in academic circles as psychosis specifically, so I reached out for help. I asked the Omega, who's a psychology researcher specializing in schizophrenia, for help, and he graciously agreed to answer my questions and sent me research material. I'm also having him vet what I'm saying here, because this is one subject I don't want to screw up.
So, let's discuss why everything here is wrong and harmful.
First of all, the card confuses schizophrenia with what was known at the time as multiple personality disorder, nowadays known as dissociative identity disorder.
And no, people who suffer from schizophrenia don't turn into another personality. Like, at all.
It was a common misconception at the time to conflate the two conditions, and unfortunately still is to this day. So what is schizophrenia or psychosis?
Well, the most common form of schizophrenia manifests itself basically as this.
I hear voices in my head, they counsel me.
But that obviously requires clarification.
It's hallucinations, which unfortunately leads to a couple more misconceptions personified in this clip from The Simpsons.
You've done grand, laddie. Now you know what you have to do. Burn the house down. Burn them all!
Now, first of all, a lot of patients don't actually see things that aren't there. They do, however, hallucinate sounds. And yes, that can include voices. Even voices that tell them to do things.
But here's the thing. The vast, I cannot stress this enough, vast majority of schizophrenics are not violent.
For example, say there's a guy who hallucinates 2 voices in his head. One is his deceased uncle, who wants to save the world, and one is of Bakula, an evil entity bent on destroying it. His uncle tells him to go buy a sandwich right now, or the world will explode, and so he does. That's it. The voice tells him to buy a sandwich.
Yeah, lock that violent maniac up, am I right?
Oh, and if you think I just made up some bullcrap to be funny, that scenario was described by an actual patient that was interviewed for a magazine article about the condition. The evil entity was named Bakula because he once saw an episode of Quantum Leap, and the name of the main actor stuck with him. By the way, it does seem silly and funny, thinking you have to buy a sandwich or the world ends. I mean, how could they believe that, right?
But we all experience something similar all the time, and namely when we dream.
We've all had dreams where we can fly, or are suddenly back in high school for one final test or something, and in the dream we don't question it. Being able to fly suddenly seems perfectly reasonable. And as I understand it, it's like that for schizophrenics. One patient I read about literally compared it to that. It all made sense in the dream. It even has a name when absurd things make sense to your brain. Aberrant salience.
I know this because I'm smart. And because the Omega told me.
Well, I hope this gives you some understanding of the condition, because those patients have enough to deal with without the general public misunderstanding. So, let's swing back to the file card paragraph. Not only did it confuse 2 different mental illnesses, but, like the Simpsons clip, it also assumed schizophrenics are violent, since Zartan is, you know, a bad guy working for a terrorist organization. And naturally, this caused a few eyebrows to be raised. Specifically by mental health professionals, who asked Hasbro to kindly cut that crap out.
And they did! Sort of.
Yeah, the Mental Health Association of Indiana asked them to recall the product. But since that sort of thing would cost, money, and Hasbro being Hasbro, they instead made a change mid-production to remove the paragraph on future toys, leaving the first one on the store shelves for a time.
Hasbro, always doing the right thing, as long as it doesn't cost too much.
To finish this whole derail, and for some foreign file card fun, the European cards didn't have the paragraph, as the toys came out later than in the US.
With that, let's finally get into the actual character, starting with the revised file cards.
He's called a Master of Disguise, and as such has aliases too numerous to list. Also, his real name is unknown, though I kinda always assumed Zartan was his real name. I mean, if you can have a guy whose actual name is Destro, then I don't see the problem here. So we've got an unknown name, unknown birthplace, and too many fake names to keep track of.
Military intelligence at its finest, everybody!
Well, now we come to the meat of the card, and there's quite a lot here. First off, it says Zartan can change his skin color at will to blend into any environment. Sure, I guess, as long as the environment is blue, I suppose. He's also a master of makeup and disguise. Yes, thank you for repeating what it says on the top of the card. And he's also a ventriloquist. Okay, I know that really means he can change his voice to sound like somebody else, but now I'll always imagine him trying to infiltrate G.I.Joe, carrying a dummy and putting on an act. He also speaks over 20 languages, and is an acrobatic-contortionist.
Okay, at this point he's a one-man circus.
Well, minus the clowns. He won't look like that until version 2. Very little is known of his background, there's that famous military intelligence again, but various agencies strongly suspect he's at European military training.
I can assure you that few, if any, European militaries use ventriloquism as one of their training methods.
The card speculates he was trained in Saint-Cyr. This refers to the École Spéciale Militaire de Saint-Cyr, the top French military academy, not to be confused with Sancerre, a rather nice type of French wine. I don't know why they think Zartan trained there. I mean, he's not on the list of alumni on their Wikipedia page.
Feel free to correct that little oversight if any of you are bored enough and see how long it lasts.
And now here's the part that will bite us in the ass later on. The card says he practices several mystic martial arts. Yeah, I bet it was this one sentence, this one small little factoid, that led Hasbro to go, "That means he's a ninja!" when it came to filling out a roster for their Ninja Force toy line.
Which segues nicely into the second file card.
And the first thing I want to point out is that it's a pain in the dick to read. That purple-pink background isn't doing my eyes any favors. The card does go straight into an explanation for the radically different look. By way of his motto. Oh yeah, he's got a motto now. My personality changes as often as my looks. And they're both bad. Well, card, I'm glad we can come together and between the two of us agree that this is a bad look.
I don't think I've ever seen a file card insult the figure itself, so that's a first.
For some reason, the card repeats the first's claim that he can change the color of his skin at will, even though the second figure doesn't use that gimmick. I think it's because this one reuses most of the first card's text, like him being a cunning linguist and the whole circus thing. It does add that captured Cobra documents reveal he's as lethal as a two-headed rattler disguised as a garter snake, and that he changes appearances and personality so much he can't even keep track of them himself.
Yeah, I think that last part is a very sanitized version of the deleted part from the original.
Nowhere on the card does it explain how or why he's a ninja now, though, meaning the repeated phrase that he knows mystical martial arts has to do a lot of heavy lifting here. And that's all we get from the original toy line.
And it was very interesting. But you know what was also very interesting? What was not in these cards?
There's no mention of him being affiliated with the Dreadnoks at all, even though he was their leader in both the comics and the cartoons. In fact, the Dreadnoks wouldn't be mentioned until the Spy Troops file card.
Well, let's move on to 2001 and version 3.
And two things immediately jump out at me. First, that's a lot of text. That's a lot of tiny text. Is this a file card or the first part of Lord of the Rings? Second, there's no art. Well, saves me a toy art talk, I guess. Instead, there's a photo. And it isn't even a photo of the actual damn toy, but of a prototype. And even that is being generous, as it's clearly just an old Zartan head glued onto a ball joint and stuck on the new body.
Anyway, the first remarkable thing in the text is that he now has a birthplace.
It's Nice, France, apparently. Yeah, this is the only file card that ever claims this. Every other one, before or after, keeps his birthplace as unknown. So we could, and in my opinion should, ignore this anomaly.
Besides, I just can't imagine Zartan with a French accent, you know?
The card talks about how he was at that French academy from the first guard, and turned his whole regiment into mercenaries, so he was arrested for treason. But he escaped thanks to his gift for disguises. That's not the reason why this is such a huge wall of text though. No, it's because they tried to cram half his comic character in, saying how he trained as a ninja and uses holograms and other stuff we'll get to when we talk about the comic. In addition to that, it says the same stuff that was in the original card. And then there's the second paragraph.
Yes, the second paragraph is back. It's a little different, but it's no less bullcrap.
Now he's extremely paranoid and has multiple personality disorder.
Oh, for shit's sake. You heard me. Yeah, normally I don't use 4-letter words in my videos, but this deserves it.
The problem with the original wasn't just that it confused two different mental illnesses. It was that they portrayed a violent bad guy as having one. And that still happens here. It's a dangerous stereotype that literally causes harm. In fact, it makes it more likely for the mentally ill to be victims of violence. Yeah, whoever wrote this was an idiot.
Moving on!
The G.I.Joe vs. Cobra cards stick mostly with the info found on the original. The revised one, I mean. But they do add a reason for Zartan being in a 2-pack with Scarlet and Stalker, respectively. He's mad at her because she's the first and only person who's ever seen through his disguise. And then, with the Stalker pack, he was the one who was the first and only one to do that.
So great continuity there!
Most of the other later cards stick with the original too, though sometimes adding he's the leader of the Dreadnoks or that he uses holograms. The exception being the movie Zartan, where they explain he's an actual shapeshifter thanks to Destro's nanomachines, and he's infiltrated G.I.Joe headquarters, and his next impersonation will be the culmination of his devious career.
Yeah, it's all stuff about the movies.
The very last file card, the 50th anniversary one, sticks with the original again, including the bit where his skin can change color. Yeah, several later file cards still include that, even though none of the later figures ever had that gimmick. The card also gives a reason for the 3-pack, namely that Torpedo and Hit and Run are tracking him through the swamp.
And those were the file cards, but before we end, I'm gonna throw out a few more tidbits that I couldn't fit anywhere else in the video.
First of all, he's got the G.I.Joe logo under his portrait on his file card. Now, he's not technically a Cobra, he's a mercenary, so the Cobra symbol shouldn't be there. But he sure as hell shouldn't have been labeled as a G.I. Joe either. I'm thinking that maybe this was an in-joke. Since he's a master of disguise, he could pretend to be a G.I. Joe. Or it was just a screw-up, we may never know. Zartan is the only character in the original line that had family members that were also toys. His brother Xandar and his sister Zarana. Both of those toys also had the color-changing gimmick and as a result the welded torsos. In the modern continuity, he also had a daughter, Zanya. By the way, all these names make me believe Zartan really is his real name.
And his parents had a cruel sense of humor.
Finally, Larry Hama, when given the character, believed Zartan was a low-level mutant, explaining his powers. But since superpowers weren't really a thing in the G.I. Joe comic, this never got used. That's why Hama went with holograms in the end, I think.
Well, that about wraps it up. I want to thank the Omega for all his help with the mental health portions of this video. Next time, we'll be looking at Zartan in the cartoons and comics. I'll see you then, everybody, and hey, why not like, share, and subscribe if that's your thing.
He's an evil master of disguise. Zartan changes color right before your eyes. Zartan.
Introducing Zartan. Zartan changes color in sunlight.
There's Zartan! He's escaping